So, Jeremy, here's a question. Help us understand, is there pressure to keep him out of baseball?
Well, I think it depends how you define pressure. I think the pressure is internal more than external. I think that Bud Selig, on his way out the door, is unlikely to make a sentimental gesture. For 22 years, there's been absolutely no reason to believe that Bud Selig wants to forgive Pete Rose, that he wants to set a precedent of taking him off the permanently ineligible list. When Rob Manfred comes in, why would why would he want to send the message that he's going to be soft on Pete Rose? Now people will say, well, you know, they've got to keep him on the ineligible list to maintain the deterrent effect. Of course, if you've been out of the game for 25 years, I think that's a pretty big deterrent. I don't think that's so much a concern as it's just the way it looks. What do they have in their interest in taking him off the ineligible list? You always have to look for what do they get out of it. We know what Pete Rose would get out of it, but what would Manfred or Selig, how would they possibly benefit by putting him back in the game?
PR. A lot of people do love Pete, right?
Yeah.
But there's not enough, I don't think.
No, I don't see, in Cincinnati, it would be a wildly popular move. I think a lot of people say forgive and forget, give him a second chance. Yeah. It's been 25 years. It cost him tens of millions of dollars, his reputation, etc. But, I mean, he didn't only break the rule, as we know. He lied about it for 15 years afterwards, not to mention 3 years before that and while he was doing it. Everybody knows in every clubhouse, Rule 21 is up there. This is something you cannot do. And people forget the details. He wasn't only gambling on the Reds, but those bets were backed by organized crime. And that's where these things get very dangerous for baseball.
Well, for me, I've always been a supporter of Pete Rose being reinstated into the game of baseball, because the argument that I make is that everything that you're talking about that he did was as a manager of the Cincinnati Reds. As a player, he's the all-time hits leader. He's one of the greatest players. I believe he has...
So you mean put him in the Hall of Fame?
Well, I'm saying put him in the Hall of Fame. That's the first order of business, I believe. I'm wondering...
That's different from reinstating.
Yeah, that's right. And reinstatement to me speaks to forgiveness. I mean, how come that doesn't factor into the equation with some of these people associated with baseball?
He signed a document agreeing to be permanently ineligible from the game.
But also on that document, correct me if I'm wrong, he does have the right to...
As everyone who was made permanently ineligible had the right. But to have it reviewed every year, or to appeal every year for reinstatement. But he signed the document so that they wouldn't dig further into his crimes and misdemeanors. His lawyer signed off on it. It was clear to just about everyone in the world except Pete Rose that this meant not only a lifetime ban, but he's on the ineligible list after he dies. Joe Jackson is on the ineligible list.
I completely disagree with your position on this. Banned for life meant banned for life. You can forgive him if you want, but you can't forget this, and you can't go back on it. You can't rescind this. It's too important to the sport. Bud Selig's constant refrain is, a sport without integrity is not a sport. You can talk all you want about PEDs, but this is going across a line you cannot cross. The 1919 Black Sox scandal nearly took down the sport of baseball. And up from those ashes came really, this was, it started the office, that's right. Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, right? And from that point on, these commissioners have tried to uphold the power of that position. And in this case, because, look, he did sign away no formal reporting on this. So there was more. This was the tip of the iceberg that hit the public here. And we can go on and on about the Dowd report and what might not have been in there. Now, John Dowd thereafter was quoted in some interviews as saying that he suspected that Pete bet as a player on games for and against his team, but then others have refuted that. I don't know what your findings are on that part.
It's vague. I've never heard anyone suggest that he bet against the Reds.
Okay.
But who knows? I mean, one thing to bear in mind here, one of the interesting facets of this, if Pete had said at the time, and maybe it was a different world back in 1989, if he had said, I have a sickness, I am an addict,
Sure.
which is what we hear from people in trouble now all the time. You know, they're alcoholics, they're sex addicts. If Pete said, I'm a gambling addict, and many people will tell you that was what Pete was, that he had a sickness, an addiction. If he had thrown himself on the mercy of Bart Giamatti, who was a very humane person, who would die a week after handing down the ruling, if he had told John Dowd, look, I see you've got me here, there's no way out, help me, he would have been back in the game a long time ago.
My response to that would be, gentlemen, ladies, the very fear he had, which some would argue contributed to his perpetual deceit, is exactly what has reared its head. The absence of forgiveness. He knew that ultimately, by acknowledging it, that he would never be forgiven and that it would be a lifetime ban. So if death, meaning a death sentence, is what you're fearing and you consider it to be a very real reality, even with admission, then what other way is there to turn? And then not only that, now we've learned over the course of time in terms of forgiveness, I'm an addict. Alcohol, drugs, whatever the case may be, America, land of second chances, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe he should have known it back then with Steve Howe and his 7-time drug offenses and all of this other stuff. But in the end, Pete Rose was fearful of the very predicament that he's now faced. And